Connective tissue. Connective tissue functions for a lot of different things. It basically connects for the most part. So it binds things, it supports, it protects in different areas of the body, it fills in gaps, it stores fat, and it helps produce blood cells. For the most part, connective tissue has good blood supply. Cartilage is an example of a type of connective tissue that does not have good blood supply, but for the most part, it does have good blood supply. The cells are also further apart than in, say, epithelial cells. If you look at this picture here, you can see that each of these little purple blobby things are a cell. And you can see how far apart they are, especially in comparison to epithelial cells. It is all over the body. Connective tissue is made up of cells, fibers, and an extracellular matrix. Extracellular just means outside of cells, and so this is like a semi-solid kind of jello-y type matrix or substance. As we mentioned before, the cells are further apart, but there are a lot of protein fibers that give strength, support, and elasticity depending on the type of fiber, which we'll talk about in a minute. There are different types of cells that are found within connective tissue, but the one that I want to cover is fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are large star-shaped cells, and what they do is they produce these protein fibers by secreting tissues into the extracellular matrix. So they secrete these fibers into the open spaces between the cells in order to make the new tissue. It's kind of like Spider-Man shooting his web. There are three types of connective fibers. We have collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. Depending on the type of connective tissue, they may have one or more of these types of fibers. Here's a little comparison of the types of connective fibers. And put them all together on one chart so that you can look at them compared to each other instead of just trying to memorize them. So collagen fibers are long and strong. They are in parallel bundles, so they all run in the same direction. They are flexible, they can bend, they have a little bit of elasticity. So elasticity means you can stretch and then return to your original shape. They also have high tensile strength. Tensile strength is the ability to resist being pulled. So it's like when you pull on a rope one end to another, it becomes taut and resists that pulling. This is really good for ligaments and tendons, things that are pulled on a lot and need to withstand that pulling. Elastic fibers are complex and branched. Now, these fibers are thin and elastic like springs. They have a lot of elasticity, so they can stretch a lot and then return to normal. They're weaker than collagen, but they're mostly used for their stretchiness, and they're found in vocal cords, in the skin, and in ligaments that hold our spine in place. Lastly, we have reticular fibers. These are complex and branched as well. They are very thin, just like elastic fibers, and what they do is they provide a supportive framework for some organs like the spleen and the liver. So these fibers help make up different types of connective tissue. You have what are called connective tissue proper and specialized connective tissue. So I'll run through some of these types of connective tissue just briefly. First, you have areolar connective tissue or loose connective tissue. This is going to form thin membranes throughout the body. It's going to help attach our skin to the organs and muscles underneath it. It'll fill gaps between muscles, and it's also what lies between most of the epithelium and the rest of the body. So when we talked about the epithelial having an underlying connective tissue in order to nourish it, we're talking most of the time about loose connective tissue or areolar connective tissue. Adipose is also known as fat. It's going to cushion joints and organs, so it acts as a nice protective covering for us. It's going to store energy. This is why when you talk about having fat in your body and the calories become fat, well, calories are just energy storage. So the more fat you have, the more energy you have to store. It also insulates your body, it helps keep you warm, and it also helps just fill in gaps. Next, you have reticular connective tissue. We talked about this a little bit before with the reticular fibers, but these thin reticular fibers are going to form the framework for some of our internal organs. Our last type of connective tissue proper is dense connective tissue. This is made out of mostly thick collagen fibers with some elastic fibers. So because it has a lot of collagen fibers, it's going to be very strong. It's going to be able to be pulled. Because it has elastic fibers, it'll also have a little bit of stretch and return to its normal shape. So this is good for ligaments and tendons that are constantly being pulled on and called on for support as you move. It also forms the deeper layers of our skin. Moving on to the specialized connective tissue, we have cartilage. Cartilage has 3 types. I'm not going to go into each of the types, but they're hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. So depending on the type of cartilage and the location, there are different functions. You can see here there are 2 types just within this joint. So you have the meniscus, which is made out of cartilage. It's for cushioning and shock absorbing within your knee. And then you have this hyaline cartilage that's beautiful and white and shiny on the end of your femur or your thigh bone, and it helps the joint glide more easily. So it protects the joint in 2 different ways. Additionally, cartilage can be used or is used for a model for building new bone, which we'll talk about when we talk about the skeletal system. And it also provides framework for things like the very end of your nose and the outside part of your ears. Bone is a very strong connective tissue. It's hard because of calcium salts or mineral salts like calcium. So in each of these little holes, you have actual bone cells. So you can see these little dots are very far apart, and then in between is all this hard extracellular matrix. So even though it's hard, it still has cells that are really far apart, all those black dots, and lots of extracellular matrix. As we know from talking about the skeletal system a little bit, bone provides the internal support for your body. It helps protect organs. It's what muscles attach to so that they can move, and it also helps form blood cells. Lastly, we have blood. Blood is very important. It is made up of formed elements, so solid parts that are suspended in fluid. We'll talk about blood a lot more when we talk about the cardiovascular system. But for right now, it's important to know that it is mostly a liquid connective tissue. It helps maintain internal environmental conditions, so it helps keep with homeostasis. It has different parts, so the liquid kind of like straw yellow color part is called the plasma. It has white blood cells for fighting infection, red blood cells for carrying oxygen, and platelets that help in clotting.